Imagine changing the course of history by accident. No grand plan, no military operation, no carefully timed political move. Just one man, standing at a microphone, reading from a piece of paper he barely understood. And within hours, one of the most heavily guarded borders in the world simply ceased to exist. This is the story of the night the Berlin Wall fell, and almost nobody saw it coming. November 9th, 1989. A single date that sits like a dividing line between two eras. On one side, a world split in two. Cold War tensions, nuclear standoffs, and a concrete wall running through the heart of a city, separating families, friends, and an entire nation from itself. On the other side, a world where that wall was rubble, where people danced on top of it, chipped pieces off it as souvenirs, and wept in the arms of strangers they had not been allowed to see for decades. What happened between those two sides of history was not a carefully executed revolution. It was messy, confusing, and powered by ordinary people who had simply had enough. And it all started with a press conference that nobody really prepared for. To understand why that night was so explosive, you need to understand what life looked like on the eastern side of that wall. Germany had been divided since the end of World War II. The western half became a democratic, prosperous nation backed by the United States and its allies. The eastern half, the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, fell under Soviet influence and became a communist state. The wall itself went up in 1961, not to keep enemies out, to keep citizens in, not because East Germans were leaving, by the hundreds of thousands. They were crossing into West Berlin and never coming back, drawn by the promise of a freer, wealthier life. The East German government could not afford to lose its own population, so they built a barrier. Concrete slabs, watchtowers, guard dogs, and shoot-to-kill orders for anyone who tried to cross illegally. For nearly 3 decades, that wall stood as the most powerful symbol of the Cold War divide. It was not just concrete. It was a statement that the state owned you and you did not have the right to leave. But by 1989, the entire communist bloc was fracturing. In Poland, a free trade union movement had forced partially free elections. In Hungary, the government had opened its border with Austria, allowing East Germans to escape westward through a back door. Yet Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet Union was pushing for reform and had made it quietly clear that Soviet tanks would not come rolling in to save struggling communist regimes the way they had in the past. The ground beneath East Germany was shifting, and the government could feel it. At the center of this crumbling system was the East German leadership, a group of aging hardliners who had spent decades maintaining control through surveillance, repression, and the constant threat of punishment. The longtime ruler Erich Honecker had been forced out just weeks earlier, replaced by Egon Krenz, a man who was supposed to represent change but was seen by most East Germans as more of the same. The leadership was desperate to appear responsive without actually giving up power. It was a balancing act they were already losing. On the streets, the pressure was overwhelming. For weeks, massive protests had been building across East Germany. In Leipzig, hundreds of thousands of people had marched peacefully, chanting for freedom and reform. The demonstrations were spreading to other cities, including East Berlin itself. These were not just political activists. These were regular people, workers, teachers, families, who were tired. Tired of being watched, tired of being controlled, tired of watching the world change around them, while their own government pretended nothing was different. And then there was Gunter Schabowski. Schabowski was a senior East German official and the government spokesperson. He was not the most powerful man in the room, but on the evening of November 9th, he was the one holding the microphone. Earlier that day, the East German leadership had been in crisis talks. The pressure from protests combined with the flood of citizens leaving through Hungary and Czechoslovakia had become unsustainable. They needed to do something, offer some kind of concession, to calm the population down. The decision was made to draft new travel regulations that would allow East Germans to apply for exit visas and travel abroad more freely. The idea was not to throw the borders wide open. It was a bureaucratic release valve. a controlled, managed process with applications and waiting periods. Something that looked like change without actually being change overnight. A note outlining the new policy was handed to Schabowski shortly before he walked into the press conference. He had not been part of the meeting where it was discussed. He had not read it carefully. Yet he barely had time to glance at it before the cameras turned on. He sat down in front of a room full of journalists, domestic and international, and began working through routine announcements. Then came the question. A reporter asked about the new travel regulations. What were they? When would they take effect? Schabowski shuffled his papers. He found the note. He read it aloud, stumbling slightly over the bureaucratic language. Then someone in the room asked the question that changed everything. When does this come into effect? Schabowski paused. He looked at his paper again. There was no date written on it, no specific start time. The regulation was supposed to begin the following day after being formally processed, after border guards had been briefed, after the system had been prepared. But Schabowski did not know that. While he looked up, shrugged slightly, and said, immediately, without delay. That was it. That was the moment. The press conference ended. The cameras cut away, and the words went out across radio and television broadcasts in both East and West Germany almost instantly. East Germans sitting at home heard the news. The borders are open. You can leave. Now. People looked at each other. Is this real? Is this actually happening? And then they started walking to the wall. At first it was small groups, curious, cautious, not entirely sure what they were going to find. But the crowds grew. Word spread through neighborhoods and apartment buildings and telephone calls. By late evening, thousands of people were gathering at the checkpoints, places that for nearly 30 years had meant danger, fear, and the possibility of being shot. Yet the border guards had no idea what was happening. No order had come through their official channels. Nobody had briefed them. They called their commanders called their superiors, and nobody had a clear answer because the announcement had not been planned or coordinated. It had simply happened. The crowd kept growing. People pressed up against the barriers, waving their identity documents, demanding to be let through. The guards were outnumbered, confused, and increasingly aware that opening fire on thousands of peaceful civilians was not a realistic option. Not that night, not with the whole world watching. One checkpoint commander, Harold Yeager, tried repeatedly to reach his superiors for instructions. No clear answer came. The crowd was enormous and growing louder. His guards were exhausted and overwhelmed. On us, he made a decision. He ordered the barriers raised, and the people flooded through. At other checkpoints across the city, the same thing was happening. A combination of crowd pressure, confusion in the command structure, and individual guards making the call that this was not a night to use force. Within hours, thousands of East Germans were crossing into West Berlin. Some crying, some laughing, some completely silent, unable to process what was happening. West Berliners came out to meet them, strangers handing strangers flowers and champagne, and just standing together in streets they had not been able to share for decades. And then people climbed on top of the wall that had defined the city for 28 years. The wall that had killed over 100 people who tried to cross it, like the wall that was supposed to be permanent and immovable and absolute. People stood on it and cheered, and the sound carried across the city like something breaking open. That night did not end the wall immediately in a physical sense. The concrete did not crumble overnight, but its power was gone. Once thousands of people had crossed freely, once the guards had stepped aside, the wall's entire purpose had collapsed. You cannot maintain a barrier that people are already walking through. You cannot project fear when the thing people feared has already been defied on live television. In the days and weeks that followed, people came with hammers and pickaxes and started dismantling it themselves. The East German government, already barely functioning, could do nothing to stop it. And the border guards who had spent years enforcing the deadly boundary stood and watched or walked away, or in some cases helped move the rubble. The government that had ordered the wall built, the government that had used it to cage its own citizens, was finished. Egon Krenz resigned within weeks. The ruling party dissolved itself. East Germany as a political entity was on borrowed time. The fall of the Berlin Wall did not just reunite a city or end a policy. It triggered a chain reaction that reshaped the world. Within months, communist governments across Eastern Europe collapsed, in Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and beyond. The Eastern Bloc, which had seemed permanent and immovable, disintegrated with stunning speed. Germany itself was officially reunified on October 3rd, 1990, less than a year after that night at the checkpoints. Two nations that had been artificially split by the aftermath of war were brought back together, and the process, while complex and expensive, was driven by the same basic force that had brought people to the wall in the first place: the human need to be free and to be whole. And for the broader world, that night in Berlin marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War. The ideological standoff that had dominated global politics for over 40 years, that had produced nuclear arms races and proxy wars and the constant shadow of potential catastrophe, was finally, unmistakably, ending. The Soviet Union itself would dissolve 2 years later, all of it tracing back in part to a man who did not read his briefing notes carefully enough. Here's the thing about history that textbooks often leave out. The biggest moments are rarely the cleanest ones. They are rarely perfectly planned or perfectly executed. They are full of confusion, miscommunication, individual decisions made in the heat of the moment, and ordinary people reacting to circumstances nobody fully anticipated. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not the result of a great military victory or a brilliant political strategy. It was the result of a bureaucratic error, a confused official, a crowd of people who decided that tonight was the night, and a handful of border guards who looked at the situation in front of them and chose not to be the last line of defense for a system that was already dying. One press conference, one unanswered question, one man shrugging and saying, "I must immediately," and the world changed. That is what makes this story so remarkable. Not that it happened through power and force, but that it happened through something far more human. A mistake, a crowd, and a moment where enough people decided all at once that the wall did not get to win anymore.